All right, welcome everybody to tonight's webinar. I'm Steve Mahoney. I'm with Kathleen Thompson. We're both mentors with the Greater Hartford chapter of SCORE. Tonight's session is all about Excel for analysis. If you missed our part one of this series, that is available on our YouTube channel. You can check that out. We're going to do a quick recap of that one, though, just in case those of you who didn't see that one yet. So to cover the things that we covered in session number one, just to recap, Microsoft Excel is part of the Microsoft suite along with Word and PowerPoint. Google Sheets is similar. You may use Google Sheets, but it is a little bit different than Excel. So we're going to focus our conversation on Excel for this class. It's primarily used for analyzing financial information or organizing data. We talked about how you could use this for not just financial, but also sales, operating, marketing, whatever kind of information you're trying to organize. And one of the things I mentioned in the first session was that the importance of Excel is not just putting the data on the spreadsheet, but it's trying to take that data, turn it into information, and use that information to make decisions. I talked about the phrase, what, so what, now what? Taking the what, which is the data itself, turning it into so what is it telling me? What does it mean? And then using it to mean now what? How are we going to use that information to make decisions? We talk about the importance of deciding your format. What are you going to use the spreadsheet for? What decisions are you trying to make? Starting with the end in mind and how you want to set up that spreadsheet and organize it. And there could be some different kinds of questions you're trying to answer. Maybe you're trying to prove a hypothesis, like, why am I not making more money? Maybe you're trying to use it for business decisions, like pricing a product or service, or maybe it's just organizing data like sales or customer information. And we also talked about the importance of capturing your data in such a way that you ensure that there's good data integrity because of the old adage, garbage in, garbage out. Here's some of the topics we covered in session one. We talked about formatting, really some of the basics, how to keep your data organized so that allows you to not just have it look clean, but also facilitate quick decision-making. We went through column sizing, number, data alignment, that kind of thing. We also went through some analysis. We talked about some simple formulas like addition, subtraction, and multiplication, division, and also a little bit around inserting columns and rows. We talked about diagnosing the formula errors, especially if you delete a row or a column that's dependent upon another row or column. And probably the most important thing that you need to know about Excel, which is the undo button, which allows you to undo the last task you just did, and that way you can prevent from making an error if you made one. And then we also talked about copy and paste, which is an important tool as you're manipulating information. So here are the topics we're going to cover tonight. We're going to get into some more complex things. We're going to go through a few more formula tips, a few more recommendations, and some helpful hints as you're going through and analyzing and referencing and sorting your data. Then I've got a few large complex spreadsheets that I'm going to show you and some more complex tools around freezing panes to help view a lot of rows or a lot of columns of data. We're going to talk about filtering and pivot tables, how to search for a key term or information in a large spreadsheet. We're going to show you how conditional formatting can help you quickly identify certain things that are above or below a certain threshold. And also, we got a recommendation the last time we taught this class about how to do a break-even analysis. So I'm going to show how to do that. And then Kathleen recommended the other night that I show you how to save different versions of your spreadsheet. So we're going to try to do that as well. That way you ensure that if you make a mistake with something, you can go back to a previous version. So with that, I'm going to open up the Excel workbook I've got saved here. We're going to go into a little demo. So we're going to start with just some information around some of these basic spreadsheets. If you recall the other night, we were going through an example of a shoe company, and we had various spreadsheets that had information with product listings and different financial information about that product. And what we're going to do in this one is we're going to try to show how you can calculate and sort different kinds of information as you go through this. So here's my sample worksheet. This may look familiar to you if you saw the other night or if you watched the replay. We've got all of our data organized. We've got different products, what category it belongs to, and we've got the date of the first sale when we first started selling the product. We've got our year-to-date sales revenue, and then we've got our price per unit and cost per unit so that we can kind of do some analysis and further understand what our product profitability is telling us. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to calculate profit per unit. Now, when you're doing something like this, one of the things you want to make sure you're doing when you're doing addition or subtraction among different cells is to make sure that you're your information is on the same basis. And what I mean by that is if we're going to calculate, let's say, gross profit per unit, we want to make sure that our data, price per unit and cost per unit, are both on a comparable basis. You wouldn't want to try to calculate this using year-to-date sales dollars because it wouldn't make sense. It wouldn't be intuitive. So in this instance, we're going to just simply calculate, price. We're going to do our revenue minus our cost per unit. You can see that turns into 5175. That's just using the subtraction format that we did before. We're going to use our copy and paste tool that we did the other night. Do edit copy. That takes your cell and that organizes it down. And we just pasted it down. So now we've got that same reference point for all of our different products that are displayed here. You could also look at this on a percentage basis if you want, just on a dollar basis. So if you want to do that, you're simply going to start with your gross profit and divide it by your sales per unit. And that gives you can see a numerical value of 0.69. Now, when you're looking at percentage of profit, you want that displayed in a percentage term. And that's where we've got these buttons that we referenced last time up top, where you can click on this percentage button, and it automatically converts that cell into a percentage instead of a decimal. Now, again, we can copy and paste this down. And now we've got this throughout the entire spreadsheet. So you can see, which products are generating the higher or lower sales percentage. While we're on this topic, sometimes when I'm talking with clients, we'll talk about gross profit, and people may say, well, what's more important? Is it gross profit percentage or gross profit per unit on a dollar basis? And the answer is it kind of depends. I like to say that you can't spend percentages, you can spend dollars. So if you have a really high profit percentage, but it's on a low dollar value unit, that may be good, but not as good enough as something that's got a really high dollar value on a gross profit basis. So that's something you want to think about as you're looking through these two things. So one of the other tools that you can do as you're looking at Excel is you can calculate what percentage of sales each of these products relates to your total. So let's say you have all your products here and you say, well, how much are each of these contributing to my total, population of sales? So the first thing you're going to do when you do something like this is you need to calculate your total sales for all your products combined. So we're going to use our sum function, which you remember in session 1, we started typing equals sum, and it pops up in our bar up here. And we go through and we mark all the cells that we want to do. And now I've got total sales of 16,560. So now if I say to myself, all right, how much did each of these contribute to my total sales? So I'm going to start over here. I'm going to let's put a title in here that says percentage of sales. And I'm going to take my 1,800 for this brown sandal that's in here, and I'm going to divide that by my total. You can see that I've got 0.11, so I'm going to convert that to percentage, and now I've got 11% of my sales is this first item. So I think, okay, great, I'll just copy and paste this formula down. What happens is you get this error called divided by 0. And this is a function of how Excel treats the reference of formulas to different cells. So you can see in your first cell, it's taking cell D2 divided by your total of D14. And when you move down a line, you've copied and pasted that formula down. So what this is doing is taking this 2,200 as your numerator, which is fine, but it's not picking up the right denominator. So, and that's the same problem with all of these formulas. You can see the denominator is picking up a blank cell down here. Now, technically, you could go in and edit every one of these cells and change the denominator to be the right cell, but there's a quicker way to do that with a tip called reference point. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete these just so we can get these errors out of the way. And what you can do is with the reference point tool in Excel, you can actually fix a portion of a formula such that when you copy and paste it, it's always going to be the same number, the same cell, and it's not going to automatically advance it a row or a column. Let me show you what I mean by that. So one of the ways to do that is to go into the cell here. And I will note that I'm using a MacBook tonight, and MacBooks and Windows treat this a little bit differently. But what you're going to do is when you go into the cell and you select function F4, you'll notice that it put a $ in before D and a $ in before 14. What that means is that it is now locked that formula to be D14. So if you copy and paste that, which I'm going to do right now, you'll notice that my formula has advanced the numerator down to this cell here. but it has fixed that denominator at my total. So now I can copy this all the way down. And this is much quicker doing this than having to go in and individually type each cell to be the right denominator. So now if you do this and you say to yourself, I wonder if this worked, does this look right? You can put a formula in at the bottom here just to add this all up, and you'll see it's 100% of sales, so it's working. So that's just a little tip you can do, especially if you're trying to do some quick formulas and you've got to copy and paste them in a lot of different places, and you want to anchor yourself to a certain cell and not have it change. You can use that reference point tool. The other thing I wanted to show as part of this spreadsheet is how you can sort data. So let's say you're looking at this and you say to yourself, I want to sort my products and each of my items by year-to-date sales in descending order. So what you're going to do is you're going to start with your go up to your data set, and you want to mark it with your mouse and your cursor, and just kind of drag it along so that you've captured all of the cells that you want to sort. And you're going to go under the data tab, and you're going to select the sort button. And you'll see a dialog box that comes up, and it's giving you the option to decide how you want to sort the information. One of the things that Excel does that's nice is it has this little option here that says My List has headers. So if you select that, it will automatically know that you've got headers, and you can, actually going to just change that real quick, and you can decide how you want to sort the information. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to select this by, try this again here. So now I'm going to select by year-to-date sales, and it's going to give me the option of either smallest to largest or largest to smallest. And now when I do that, it's now sorted everything in descending order by year-to-date sales. So that's a nice feature where you can just decide to sort a bunch of data. Now, the one thing I will caution you on is to be careful when you're selecting the data to sort for this. So I'm going to undo this just so you can see what it looked like beforehand. And while I do that, I want to show you another little feature in Excel, which is where you can put some color in to a cell. You could also change the color of text if you want. But let's say you wanted to just highlight this cell in yellow, let's say. If you go back to your Home tab, there's two little color options that are here. One is to fill the cell with color, and the other is to change the font color, like the text. So in here, we're just going to do this, and we're going to make this green. Let's say we wanted to make it green. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and try to sort my data. And let's say I accidentally forget to pick up the last two columns. So now I'm going to do this. Now what you'll notice is that this information didn't sort right. It's actually picking up. It only sorted certain cells, not everything. So you want to make sure that as you're calculating and doing all your cells, that you're picking up everything correctly. So for instance, if your gross profit or your percentage of sales didn't calculate correctly, you want to make sure that your entire cell block is picked up in your cell selection period. So what we're going to do next is we're going to talk a little bit about our pricing model that we went through the other night. So if you recall, we created a pricing model to say, how would I think about how much revenue and my cost and my profit's going to be on a unit basis and in total? And what I want to show in this example of how you can replicate that pricing model to look at different scenarios. And as you're going through this, you remember we wanted to, as we're thinking through how to set up the spreadsheet, you want to think about which elements go in rows, which ones go in columns, and how to think about painting the picture of what that data set is going to look like as you're starting to create that spreadsheet. So this is similar to the one we had the other night in class number 1. And what I've got here is I've got all my months going across here. I've got my sales price and my cost per shoe. I've got how much I think I'm going to sell per month, calculating my total revenue. You can see it's taking 120 times 8. I've got my cost per shoe. It's going to cost me $55. I'm also going to use 8 because that's how much I'm going to sell. That's how much my cost is going to be. That's calculating that. And then I calculate my gross margin per shoe, both on a dollar and a percentage basis, and then I can calculate my total profit. So what if you're looking at this and you think, maybe I'd like to have a different scenario and try to see what my revenue and profit would look like if I had a different price point. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to mark all of this because I want to create a copy of this entire table. So we've gone through copying individual cells and individual formulas. Now we're going to copy an entire table. So I'm going to just do my copy function here, and I'm going to go down, give myself a little space at the bottom. I'm going to select paste, and now I've got an entire copy of that table down here. Now, what you'll notice is that all of the formulas that we had up here, this 960 is picking up 120 times 8, rows 9 and 10. Down here, I've got the same numerical output, but it's now calculating based on these two cells. So it's creating an exact copy, but the formulas are now replicating. They're anchoring off the cells that it is adjacent to, because it's created a copy of not just the numbers, but the cells and the formulas itself. So now as you look at this, you say, wow, this is great. Now I can just kind of do some more scenario planning. But as you start to scroll down, you notice, well, when I start to do this, I can't really see what month I'm in because I've lost my label headings. So this is where, when you get to a point where your Excel spreadsheet becomes bigger than what you can view on the screen, you want to use a tool called Freeze Panes. It's very easy to use, and it's something that I use an awful lot. What you're going to do is you want to go to the cell in your spreadsheet where you want to lock the heading of both your rows and your columns. You can see I put my cell right here underneath the January and right to the left of the men's shoes label. And I'm going to go to View, and I'm going to click on this button that says Freeze Panes. And what you'll notice is that it's put a vertical line and a horizontal line in my spreadsheet. So now when I scroll down, you can see I can go down to this bottom table and I can still see what month I'm in. And if you wanted to add in more months and make this like a 12 or 18-month projection, as you scroll over, you can see that this left-hand column over here is frozen as well. So you could get to June and you can still see all of your labels. So as you're doing this, this is a very helpful tool. You want to just be careful you're anchoring on the right cell where you're going to freeze your pane. If you want to turn it off, you just select Unfreeze Panes, and you can see that when the lines go away, that means it's not there. And I'll show you an example of what happens if you use the wrong cell. So if I selected this by mistake and I clicked Freeze Panes, you'll notice that it didn't solve my problem. And again, you can just unfreeze panes and then just pick a new one. So now let's say I'm going to use this tool to try to create an alternate pricing scenario. And I'm going to assume that my cost per shoe is going to be the same in this, call it scenario B. But I'm going to change my price points. So now I'm going to say I want to charge $105 per shoe. And if you remember, last time we picked up the different cells so that we wanted to change it once and it would automatically carry across because we used some reference formulas. And let's say if I decide I'm going to sell it for less, maybe I'm going to be able to sell more shoes because it's cheaper. So now I'm just going to increase my sales projection here. And let's say I can sell a lot more shoes. And now my cost hasn't changed because it still costs me the same amount to acquire each shoe. I've just changed how much I'm charging my customers, but I am selling more. And if you'll notice, all of the formulas down here have now recalculated. So my gross margin for shoe is now, it's gone from $65 down to $50. My percentage has gone from 54 down to 48, and now my profit has recalculated based on this new sales volume. So one of the things you can do is you start looking at this, you can say, well, if I want to compare these, like there's a lot of data here, but how do I zero in on what I really want to focus on? One of the things you can do is you can hide rows and columns in Excel. So I'm going to show you that next. So as you're thinking about this, you may say, well, maybe you do this 3 or 4 times, and you've got 3 or 4 different pricing scenarios, and you say, how do I just focus in on a couple key lines and not have to worry about everything? One of the things you could do is you could say, all right, well, let's just focus on revenue and profit. So I'm going to go and hide these cost and gross margin columns because I just want to focus on revenue and profit. So the way you do that is you mark the row that you want to hide. And you can do this for a column too. And you just mark it. And once you mark it over here on the row number, you'll see that the entire row is shaded. And then you're just going to drag your cursor down to the rows that you want to hide. You're going to right click and you're going to select hide. You could also delete these if you wanted to. You could insert new rows, however you want to do it, but you're going to hide those rows. And I'm also going to do that down here. So now when I do that, it's a little cleaner design. I've got just the number of shoes, my price point, and my profit. The rows are still there. They're just hidden. And the way you can tell that they're hidden is 2 reasons or 2 ways. One is there's this green line that's right here. You can see that bold green line. That tells you that there's cells tucked underneath there. There's rows tucked underneath there that you have hidden. And you can also notice that when you look down your spreadsheet, you can see that this skips from row 12 to row 19. And same thing down here, it goes from 28 to 35. So the other nice thing is that when you go to if you wanted to change any assumptions, even though those cells are hidden, the formulas are still going to work fine. So if you decided to increase this to 10 and this increase to 12, that total profit has recalculated, even though it's using cells that are hidden because the cost cells are now hidden. If you want to unhide anything, just go to a row above and a row below. Just make sure you've marked above and below the area that's hidden. Right click, select unhide, and now your rows are back in visible. And again, you could do this for columns as well. You know, if you decide you wanted to hide a certain number of columns, you could do that as well. And again, you can use your undo button to undo that. So that's just a way to kind of play around with larger chunks of data and larger spreadsheets and larger formula blocks that you can move around. And then again, the freeze panes tool is a really important one that can help you crystallize what you're looking at as you're trying to scan up and down a bunch of different rows. Which brings us to this. So the previous spreadsheets that I've gone through were all just simple ones that I made up. The next couple are going to be ones that I found online, just sample Excel data. It's just made up data. It's just a way to illustrate some of the tools. Now, if you had this spreadsheet that you were working with for your company or another company that you were working with, and you'd open this up and you want to do some analysis on it, the first thing I would do is basically say, what am I looking at? How much information do I have? Now, as I look at this, I've got columns A to P. Okay, that's manageable number of columns, but let's see how many rows of data I've got. I scroll all the way down. I'm like, oh my God, I've got a lot of rows of data. I've got 700 rows of data. That's a lot. So the first thing I'm going to probably do is I'm going to put my freeze panes tool on because I want to be able to scroll up and down and be able to see my headers, right? I'm scrolling now, I'm in row 40 and I can still see the headers at the top. The other tool you can use that's very helpful with large data sets is called a filter. So that's under the data ribbon. And if you click on that and you select filter, you'll notice that it's put these little arrows on top of each of these columns. This allows you to select and display only certain items within that data set. So for instance, if I click on this filter here, a little dialog box opens up, and you can see that all of these options, these are all of the options that are under this column of data. It's either Canada, France, Germany, Mexico, or the United States. All the boxes are checked, which means you've selected all of them to display. But let's just say that I only wanted to see data for Canada. So I'm going to unselect all of them, and then I'm going to select Canada. And you'll notice that my data has now changed to only be showing Canada. Now, there's 3 different ways that Excel shows you that there is a filter turned on. And it's very important to know when you're looking at data if a filter is on or not. That's why I think it's nice that Excel gives you a few different options to do this. The first is at the very top. You'll notice that the top of this country column has changed to a filter icon. Instead of a drop-down arrow, it's a filter icon. The other thing you'll notice is that the rows over here are highlighted in blue. And you can notice that the rows have kind of skipped the numbers because it's only showing Canada. Lastly, down at the very bottom, you can see there's down in the bottom toolbar here, it says 140 of 700 records found. So that's telling you that there's 140 options that have Canada associated with them. Now, when you're using filters, it probably makes sense to only filter on items that are going to have a handful of options. So what do I mean by that? Let's undo all of our filters. So I just turned that filter off for the country. That changed back to an arrow. There's no blue highlighted rows, and this warning down here is gone. So let's look at our segment. I've got, 5 different segments that I could choose. That might make sense to filter on. But when you get to something like units sold or gross sales, using a filter is probably not going to make a lot of sense because they're such unique cells, such unique numbers that are in these cells that if I just pick gross sales, you can see all of these options that are down here. And if I picked one and said, show me 2051, it's going to give me one record. Not really going to be meaningful. So you want to think about, say, using the filters for options where you want to try to show chunks of data for like a certain data set and not individual business records is how to think about it. So another nice tool you can use in a data set like this is creating what's called a pivot table. So we've talked a lot about trying to sum data and saying, I'm going to sum up my sales revenue or my units sold or something like that. What if you were looking at this and you wanted to look at data across multiple dimensions? Let's say I wanted to see sales for the government segment in Germany for, this calendar year. What would that look like? You could do a lot of work trying to do some complicated sum formulas, or you could create what's called a pivot table. So that's under the insert part of the ribbon, and you select insert, and then you select pivot table. And you see this dialog box that opens up, and it's going to basically give you an option to select where the data that you want. This is going to default to all the data, which is what we want. It also gives you an option to either put the pivot table in a new worksheet or the existing worksheet. I highly recommend you put it in a new worksheet. That way you don't do anything to your existing data set. You keep it clean, and you'll see why in a minute. So I'm going to just select a new worksheet. And what it does is it's created a new sheet at the bottom of your Excel workbook. And it's got this thing over here that says pivot table. And it says to build a report, choose fields from the pivot table field list. So what's created over here is a dialog box with all of these selected columns that you have in your data set. So let's say you're going through this and you go, okay, well, I want to see segment, I want to see data by country, and I want to see gross sales. So what the pivot table does is and let's say I also want to see profit. We'll put another data set in here. It's organized all of your data in such a way that you now have the sum of profit and the sum of sales organized by country, then by segment within each country. Now you can play around with this and change this however you want. Let's say I'd rather see sales before profit. I'm just going to drag that up. Now you can see sales has moved before profit. Let's say I want to see segment before country. You can do the same thing. It's not letting me do that. I move up. So now when you do that, now you can see that segment is the first item that shows, and now you're seeing first by segment, then by country. You could also add in product if you wanted to. Let's just say we wanted to show product, and I wanted, maybe I don't want product to be a row because that might make it kind of complicated. What if I made product a column? Now I can see that I've got my data. It's by product going across. These are all my different product sets over here. And I've got my gross sales by product, and I've also got it organized by channel and by country. And then maybe I decide that, maybe I don't need profit in here. Maybe I just want to see sales. You can go down to this values thing, and you can remove profit. You can just remove that field. And now it's just going to show me sales. So now what I can do is I can go and just organize my numbers here. I can format our numbers. We did this in the first class where you go over to your home tab and you select, I'm going to put it in comma format. I'm going to remove the decimals. Now I've got a nice table here that kind of shows me what this looks like. Now, the other thing you can do as you're thinking through your pivot table is you could make some of these things filters. So let's say you wanted to look at this by, let's add in, I think that's good. Let's make segment a filter instead of a row. You can drag this up here, and now what this does is you've got your products going across here, and you've got your countries going down here, and you can actually choose to display whatever segment you want. By default, it's showing you all, but now, just like the previous tab, you could decide if you want to just show this for your government segment, let's say. So there's a lot of different ways that you can play around with this. I will tell you that I'm by no means an expert on pivot tables. I learned a lot of this just kind of preparing this on the fly and trying to figure out what might make sense in a pivot table spreadsheet and moving data around to see what it might look like. Now, one thing that you'll notice, much like the way we did filters, is that certain things may not make sense to put in a pivot table. So for instance, year might make sense because you could say, I want to see my sales by year. And let's say I want to make year a filter so that I can move this up here. And I've got my sales revenue by product over here, and it's organized by country and segment. And I can pivot to check to show either 2013 or 2014. Some things may not make sense at all. I'm going to unclick the year one and just take that out. But so for instance, if you've got something like sales price, that might just be way too much data to put in here, or units. So some of these things you may find just it could be too cumbersome in terms of how you build your pivot table. So it's helpful to just play around with this with the data set and move the rows and columns and values and filters around and see what works for you. So that's our sales data and that's our pivot table. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to look at another data set, this completely different data set. This is all using employee data, just made up employee data. Again, these aren't real people or real data. But I want to show you a couple different functions you can use in a different kind of data set. So in this one, I've got, again, I think 900 rows of data, 1,000 rows of data in this spreadsheet that I just scrolled down quickly to see how big it was. I've already turned on my freeze panes. I've already turned on my filters. And one of the things that you can do in a big data set like this is something called conditional formatting. So an example of this might be is if you're looking at your data set and you say to yourself, we're concerned about some potential employee retention. And we want to understand if we've got anybody in the IT department in the United States that's making less than $60,000. Now, trying to discover that by looking at this wall of data would be impossible. However, you could do a few filters. I'm going to just go by department, and I'm just going to select IT. I've got 241 records. That's kind of a lot. Now I'm going to just pick the US. That's 165. That's also kind of a lot. Now you could try to sort this data by salary and just pick where, that $60,000 cutoff came out, but that might kind of trying to maneuver all that data around and keep sorting it and unsorting it might get kind of convoluted. So we're going to use something called conditional formatting. So one of the things you can do here is you click on this button, it's under your home tab. There's a lot of different options in here. We're going to use one called the highlight cell rule, and we're going to select less than. So what this does is it says, and we're just going to use the default, what's called the style. Again, a lot of different options here you could play around with. And what we're going to do is we're going to say, we want to highlight any cell value that's less than a certain dollar amount. And I can put in $60,000 here. Oops. And it's going to tell me that it's going to fill it up with light red fill with dark red text. So now when I do that, I can see that oops, I don't know if I applied that. So now when I did, I went and marked the column that I wanted to do that for on the annual salary. I went into my conditional formatting, typed in my rule, and now you can see that it's highlighted the cells that are most important, the ones that I'm looking for. So I don't have to hunt and peck for anything. I don't have to sort a lot of data, but now I can go find the handful of people who are in that risk category, and now I know the ones I need to focus on. The other thing you can use in a large data set is the search tool. So I'm actually going to turn off all of these filters here, just so we can reset back to our core data set. I want to go see what filters I've got on. I've got the country turned on. I've got IT turned on. Now I can verify that I've turned all my filters off because this little warning down here doesn't have anything. So you could be going through and you say, well, we're trying to find an employee, but we don't remember, like we're looking for a certain name, but it's not, or the data is not organized by first name or last name. It's organized by employee number, and we don't really know how to find it. You can search a large data set just for text within a cell. And the way to do that is you can either go up to the search box up here, or you can go to Control F, which basically pops open a dialog box. And let's say you're looking for the last name of Jordan or the first name of Jordan. And what you can do is you can select that, and then it's going to take you right to that next cell. So you can see this person's name is Jordan Trong, and you can find the next one if you're looking for one. Now there's a Daniel Jordan, Ezekiel Jordan. So that's just, Control F or Function F, whichever works for your Mac or your Microsoft computer, will help you be able to search for things in large data sets. So that's just another little tool that you could use with the search function. So the other thing we're going to talk about when it comes to conditional formatting is how you can use this for non-financial data. So we spent a lot of time talking about financial reports and different cells and pricing and things like that, but Excel is a great tool for managing operational information. So we've got an example here of like a project plan. And you could have a project plan that's got, this one has a sample of like 7 or 8 steps. You could have one that's got 100 steps. And you could use conditional formatting to help you determine if you've got any concerns about any risks associated with a project. So we've set this one up in advance just to save us some time. And you'll notice that the way this works is I've got all the risks down here, what organization they relate to. And then I've got a scale here where the instructions say, I'm going to rate the risk on a scale of 1 to 5 for both likelihood and impact. And then I'm going to calculate a weighted score by multiplying those two numbers together. And if you'll notice, all of these cells have a green stoplight, and that's because we set up a conditional format. And I'm going to go to conditional formatting. I'm going to select manage rules because this rule already exists. And this is what's called an icon set. So I see that this one is here. It's got the stoplights here. So say, well, how does this work? So I'm going to open it up, and you can see that there's different types of rules you can put in place in this sense. This is called an icon set. You can also use data bars or different color scales. And what we've created here is a format that says, all right, I want to take that cell where I'm going to calculate my risk. And if it's greater than or equal to 16, I want a red stoplight to show up. And if it's between 8 and 16, I want it to be yellow. And if it's less than 8, I want it to be green, because that way I know it's a green risk and it's a low risk. So now I've got my rules all formatted. So now I'm going to go and complete my risk assessment. So my first one is budget not properly managed and cost escalate. Maybe I say that that's a likelihood of 2, but the impact could be 5. So you can see that it now calculated a risk of 10, and it changed that score to yellow. Pricing analysis underestimates costs. Let's say the likelihood of that is 1, but the impact is 5. It kept it at green because it's less than my 8. Social media costs exceed budget. Well, we're kind of concerned about this because we know we've got a really aggressive social media campaign. I'm going to make that a 4. And it's such a huge component of our costs. That's going to be big. I'm going to also make that a 4. You can see that that now tripped over to red because it's 16. So if you can imagine where you've got a large project or a large data set and you're trying to assess what are the things I need to focus on without having to go through every single cell and do that critical thinking, you could do that thinking once and say, I'm going to do my risk assessment. I'm going to update it once a week. And everything that's got a red on it, I got to focus on immediately. And then I got to focus on the things that are yellow. You could also imagine using something like this for maybe a sales pipeline where you've got a list of customers that you're trying to manage and you're trying to figure out where are they in the pipeline and how likely are they to be a customer of mine? And when's the last time I reached out to them? What was their major concern? Are they a continuing client that I'm worried about canceling? Maybe I've got to make them a high risk of retention. So you can imagine how you could use certain things like conditional formatting in a risk assessment tool, in addition to calculating profitability or sorting product by sales. So that's just kind of another example of how Excel can be really popular. So one of the things that I wanted to talk about next is what's called a break-even analysis. So we've gotten questions on this before, and sometimes break-even can mean different things to different people. And the way we're going to explain this tonight is the point where it's really kind of applicable to product or retail or manufacturing organizations, less so in terms of service, and unless you wanted to think about your business on an hourly rate. But let's go to a world like a retail environment. So this is to the point to ask yourself, at what point am I going to be selling enough product that I'm actually going to be net cash flow neutral? And I'm going to be at my break-even point so that once I sell more than that, I'm going to be profitable. So the way you can do this, there's 2 ways I'll show this. One is a graphical depiction. And this one basically says, there's a few different lines here to focus on, but I want to take your attention to the table at the bottom. Going up and down the vertical axis here are the dollars, and going across the horizontal axis here are number of units sold. And you're going to assume for purposes of this example that you sell your product for $225 it costs you $100 to manufacture or buy. So that's a unit variable cost. And you've got $75,000 of fixed costs. Fixed costs are there no matter what. If you sell 0 or 1,000 units, your fixed costs are always the same. So if you look at how this works, and in the far left here, if I sell 0 units, I've got 0 revenue, and I've got $75,000 in cost because I've got my fixed cost of 75, and I don't have any variable costs because I haven't sold anything. So my net cash flow is going to be down here. It's going to be, really low. Then as I move up and I go to 300 units and I start to say, okay, now my sales revenue is 67.5. My total costs have increased to 105 because I've got those variable costs plus my fixed costs. And if you'll notice, you're still kind of, below profitability here. Now, when you get up to 600 units and you get to your sales of $135,000 and your total costs are $135,000, now you've broken even. So down here, you were losing 75,000. Here, you were still losing about 38,000. Here, you've now broken even because you've sold enough units and made enough gross profit per unit to cover your fixed costs. Now, when you get on to 900 units, you can see that you start to slope up to a higher point where you're now going to be in a profitability situation. So this is a graphical way of depicting this. I've got a mathematical example as well. So the way this would work, if you wanted to do this for your business, and again, you mostly in the retail or manufacturing space, if you're selling products, is the information you would need is you need to understand what are the fixed costs it takes to run your business. And I tend to look at this on an annual basis. How much is your variable cost per unit to produce or buy? And then what's your sales price per unit for your product? And a lot of times when you're thinking about your fixed costs, trying to understand if it's variable fixed, there's sometimes going to be a gray area. Just try to assume that, try to get it close enough. It's not going to be a perfect science as you're thinking through your cost structure. So in this example here, I've got my fixed cost for me $48,000. My variable cost per unit is $46. The sales price is $130. And by definition, my gross profit is going to be $84. So one way to calculate my break-even number of units is to simply take my fixed costs divided by my gross profit per unit. And that would tell me that I need to sell just over 571 units to break even. But if you want to test out if that really makes sense, you could use this little chart that I created over here to say, show me my revenue, variable costs, fixed costs, and profit if I sell each of these different numbers of units. And you have all the information to calculate this. So I'm going to use all the formulas we've been using tonight and in the previous session to say, if I want to calculate my revenue, I'm going to take my number of units, I'm going to multiply my sales price, I'm going to take my variable costs, I'm going to take my number of units times my variable costs. My fixed costs I know are $48,000. And my profit is going to be my revenue minus my variable costs minus my fixed costs. And you can see if I only sell 100 units, I'm going to lose $39,600 primarily because I've got these fixed costs. So now I want to say, what does my profitability look like at all these different sales volume levels? So we're going to use our reference point formula to basically say, how do I go through and I want to fix my sales price. I want to fix my variable costs. I want to fix my fixed costs. My profit formula is fine because it's referencing only these cells up here. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to copy this over here. And you can see what happened is now it's picking up my $26,000 of revenue because I've now sold 200 units. My variable costs have also increased. My fixed costs have stayed the same. You can see my profitability is still losing money, but it's gotten better. So I'm going to copy this formula all the way over. And you'll notice that once I get between 500 and 600 units, I start to turn a profit, which is the same math that we did down here, which is you need to get just past 571 units to get that profitability. So that's just an example of how you can use Excel to calculate a break-even calculation. Now, another thing you could do is you could say to yourself, well, what if I want to play around with my price point? You could also say to yourself, all right, what's my gross profit going to be at various different price points if I sell these different numbers of units? Because you could say, well, this just assumes that I keep my sales price at 130. What if I increased it in $10 increments, what that might look like? So what I've done here is I've said, all right, if I take my gross profit per unit, and I'm going to look at my, and what I've got to do here is, Kathleen, I may need a little help here. Forgetting how I did this one. My gross profit per unit minus my fixed cost, that's going to tell me I'm going to lose $42,000. I think I did that right. And then what I want to do is I want to basically anchor in my reference points here. And now when I go through and calculate this over, you can see that even if I increase my price point by all these dollar amounts, I'm still not going to make any money. But if you go over here, you can start to see that you start to turn a profit when you start raising your price point up to the $100 of gross profit, or you start to sell more of these units. So this just gives you some sensitivity analysis in terms of how you calculate your gross profit and your units sold and how you think about your various price points. So the last thing I want to share with you tonight is when you're saving different versions of Excel, of your Excel workbook. So a lot of times you may start working on a budget, or you may start working on a project plan, and you start doing a lot of surgery to the spreadsheet, and you're not quite sure if it's going to work, but you're going to go ahead and try it. One of the things you may decide to do is to save a version of your starting point so that if you make any errors or make any catastrophic issues with your new version, you can always go back to your old version. So the simple way to do that is, first of all, you want to be always saving your file, just like every Excel document or Word document. You always want to be saving. You got the save icon here. It's the little floppy disk icon. You just click save. You can see now that it's told me it's saved it to my Mac. You could also use the file save as tool. And what this will do is this will, if you do save as, it'll prompt open a new dialog box and you can rename it. Now, I've been calling this file with today's date and calling it working because it's my working folder. But if I wanted to rename this to new, I could rename it as new, hit save, and it's going to create a copy of this in a new file name, and it's going to previously keep my old file name without making any changes to it. The other way you can do this is if you use like Windows Explorer or the Mac Finder tool, you can go into that folder, create a copy of the file, and then just open up the copy or the new version of it, and you can keep your old one there. That's a tool that I use a lot. It's also important as you're thinking about what I call version control, which is if you're using multiple different versions of like a budget or even a different kind of pricing model, try to put something, you could use version numbers, version 1, 2, 3, 4, et cetera, or you could use dates. I like to use dates because then I know this is the version that I did 2 weeks ago because it's got that date from 2 weeks ago on it. That'll kind of help you do that. So that pretty much summarizes the demo. I think I covered everything we were going to do. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing that. I'm going to bring back up the PowerPoint, and we are going to go to Q&A if we have any questions that folks have asked in the Q&A box.
We don't have any questions in the Q&A box right now. What
Right.
I was hoping you might do is go back to Excel and show a couple of other things.
All right. Are we in stump the band mode now? Are you going to try to stump me?
No.
There is one thing I forgot. I'm just joking. You can try to stump me. I'm not too proud. While we do that, can you put up our poll, our second poll?
Yes.
So
We have a question too, so
okay,
I'll put
good.
up the poll.
So for those of you who are looking at the poll now, we have an option if you want to get a SCORE mentor. And we're going to ask you a question now. If you're interested in getting a SCORE mentor, if you answer yes to question 2, which says, would you like a mentor? You'll get an email from me. That's the only email you're going to get. I'm not going to blast you with emails. It'll tell you how to get a SCORE mentor and give you some additional information on how to do that. So take your time answering that while we're still here. Do we want to go to that question, Kathleen, or go to your
yes, either way, you've got to go back to Excel, so because you got to demonstrate.
Let me pull that
start
open.
with Cedric's question.
Okay.
Would you show if you drag the F4 button or press?
So what I did in that one was let's see here. Let me go back to this one here. So what I did was I went up to actually edit the cell that was up here. And then I I went to my keyboard and just held down the function and F4. And you'll notice that as I'm doing that, Excel is actually toggling among different options. So if I press it once, it puts a dollar sign before the D and the 14. If I do it again, it's just the 14, then it's just the D, and then it's back to none. It's giving me the option to toggle either locking only the cell itself, just the column, or just the row. And that could depend what you want to do, depending upon how you want to do that. So the other thing you could do if you don't want to use the F4 is you could simply go in and you could type in the dollar sign just using it on the keyboard, and that would still work. You don't have to use the function F4. That's a keyboard shortcut. I hope that helps, Cedric. But thanks for pointing that out.
Okay. Jose says, what about identifying duplicate values and filtering for how many times a duplicate shows? For example, counting how many times $75 shows up.
There was a way to do that. I think conditional formatting is probably the best way to do that. Do you know, Kathleen?
Well, he says, I know we can highlight the duplicates to show with conditional formatting, but he wants a total. I have a feeling it is in filtering somewhere. The question is, like, say manufacturing price. If you filter it and say, ask it.
That's everything with $10 as a manufacturing price. And it's given me 202 of 700 records. So if you did this and you wanted to sum all of these.
Well, it shows the total number at the bottom.
Shows you how many are here. So I've applied my filter. It says I'm in filter mode. And let me just do that again. So it showed down here that you've got 202 of 700 records. Now, if you wanted to, let's say, sum up all the gross sales associated with that, you could use a pivot table. That might be an easier way to do it. Let's see if I can do that and see if that would work. This may or may not work. So this is a new pivot table. So what did I say? Manufacturing price, right? And I mean, you could just do this. I think it's giving me the sum of the manufacturing price, which is not what I want. But I wonder if I could use that as a different. I'm not sure. It's a good question. I'm not sure if, well, let's see here. This may work, actually. Yeah, this could work. So let's say you wanted to see all the sales by a manufacturing price. What I've basically done is I've pulled up a pivot table that organizes the sales by country and then segment. And then you could filter on just the ones that are $10, let's say, and that would give you the sales for all your $10 units. I think that's working. It looks like it is.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
Hopefully that helped. That answered your question.
Oh, MS says use count if function.
Yeah, that's another option. I thought about using,
or
so
count of potentially.
Yeah, so there's some more. We only covered some really simple formulas in tonight's session. There are a lot more complicated functions that you can use and formulas that you can use. They're in the formulas section. There's tons of different ones that Excel can use. So yeah, you could play around with these and explore them. I'm not a count if expert to do it off the top of my head, but that is something you could try to use.
I wondered if you could go to the other spreadsheet that had the HR situation. Yeah, and when you filtered by IT, and then you filtered by US. Like one of the things you can do in the filtering is you can use logic. It doesn't have to just match a dollar amount, for example.
Yes, I meant to
So
show the
rather than just
that's-
use conditional formatting, I wanted you to show that because I don't know how many people are aware of how many robust options there are within the filter option.
yes. So thank you for pointing this out because I meant to show this on here and I forgot to. So so what I just did here was I just filtered on IT and US, right? So those are the two filters that I'm applying, and I've got 165 records. You could now use, instead of using conditional formatting, you just go in and create a custom filter where if you select, you could basically, if I clicked on this, the salary column, I could now choose any of these options, whether it's greater than a certain dollar amount, whether it's less than, whether it's between, what the top 10 are. Maybe let's say you want to see the top 10 paid employees. I'm not sure why that one's only showing up one person, but not sure why that didn't work. But it is strange. I would have thought that would have. Oh, you know what? I bet it is. I bet it's applying top 10 to the entire one, and there was only one person from IT. Maybe that.
Oh, right.
Let's try it. Let's try turning off the filters here and see if that logic works. But there should be a way to do that, I would think. But in any event, and when you get into the annual salary, you could play around with, the different. Yeah, so here it's showing the top 10 employees, but and then you can see, then you could further scale back to, IT or whatever if you wanted to. So that's one way you can, now it's basically showing you the top 10 paid employees because you can see these are all the dollar amounts. So that's another way to look at a subset of data. And you could also look at, there's a lot of, you could also pick, you could increase it to the top 20. It just added in all these ones. So you'll see as you play around with this, it dynamically updates the filter that you're looking at. I mean, I just typed in 70,000 and it automatically just expanded it to show 768 of 1,000 records.
And go
So it's
back to
very
that,
dynamic.
go back to that same screen, Steve, because you'll notice that as soon as Steve put in greater than 70,000, it gives you another choice if you want to do and or. So you could do and less than 200,000 or something like that, and it will give you both of those. It will give you the range in between, and that's where you get some really dynamic capabilities. I've used this so many times I can't even tell you.
Right. Right. And for those of you who were there at the first session, you maybe heard it when I did when you watched the replay. A lot of what you learn in Excel is by playing around with it and just kind of experimenting and figuring out if I move this from, like you saw what housing with the pivot table. I mean, I learned some pivot table data skills just preparing for this class, just figuring out what happens when you move data around. Any other questions? I know we're about 8 o'clock here.
None at present.
All right. Well, in that case, I'm going to stop sharing that and I'm going to bring back up our closing slide here. All right. I want to thank you all for joining tonight. I hope you all enjoyed this webinar and got something out of it. If you are interested in checking out our other webinars, you can go to our YouTube channel. Just go to YouTube and search for SCORE Greater Hartford. You'll find all the webinars that we've recorded, and you can watch as many as you'd like. And if you're interested in getting a mentor or learning more about SCORE, you can go to score.org. And also, if you go to our YouTube channel and you click the subscribe button, you'll be notified every time we post a new webinar video. So thanks everybody for joining tonight. I hope you all have a great night and we'll see you soon.